Now, turn off all the lights and get ready to never sleep again. In my hometown, our fields were covered by a fog the whole summer, by polonium poisoning. Nestled on a cliff with no beach, our little town would be just another unremarkable remote place most people wouldn't think about twice. But, for as long as I can remember, we had a tourist attraction so irresistible that people we didn't know would swarm our streets in the summer. Our winters were uncomfortably cold due to the proximity to the sea. Springs were awfully rainy, and with all the strangers moving around every summer, the only season I was actually able to enjoy was the fall. You see, every summer a whimsical fog covered the best part of our fields. The crops were intact when the equinox came, but they couldn't be worked for 3 whole months. Our ancestors tried to circumvent this issue by choosing plants that could mostly take care of themselves for a while, exchanging them by more delicate species in other towns, and most of all, by spreading the word about the fog so people would come to check out this unique oddity and hopefully make our pockets fuller. Needless to say, it worked. By the time I was 17 and a junior tour guide, we had a waiting list of 2 years to visit the foggy fields. The town was so small and so geographically limited that we simply couldn't create space for more tourists without making the locals' lives even harder. The reason why the fog was so popular wasn't only its strangeness. A permanent, heavy fog that lasted exactly the entire summer, no more and no less. But because we believed that any couple who entered the fog together would have a long and happy marriage. It wasn't a mere belief, because the proof was all around, plain to see. All the married couples in town were still lovey-dovey. There were no divorces, no couples screaming to each other, no broken homes. A couples counselor that ventured to this place would starve. It was almost ritualistic for newlyweds and recently engaged couples all over the country to come and spend a ridiculous amount of money on our modest hotels and bland meals, trying to make sure that they'd live happily ever after, just like our kin. Some couples, like my parents, even offered small lectures about how they made their marriage perfect every day by catering to each other's needs unconditionally and wholeheartedly. And they weren't the only ones. It was more than once per summer that I heard from even older couples the excruciating details of their passionate sex lives. As a teen, I thought it was disgusting, preposterous, and even concerning that mom and dad still kissed each other on the lips every day, multiple times and in front of everyone. It was clear that, even after almost 25 years, my parents were still every bit as much in love as they were when they got together, if not more. Their rose-colored glasses were everlasting, and the tourists seemed overjoyed with the idea of growing old like that. Even happiness can be too much. So growing up used to this being the norm, I never dreamed of romantic love. Maybe deep down I thought I'd never find a partner as attentive and devoted as my parents were to each other. It was a bit of that and a bit of the incident with my cousin Diana. Diana was one of those silly farm girls who cared about nothing but her horses, never feeling at ease around people. She was 2 years younger than me, but we weren't close because, well, I had other interests in life and she could be a little too boring. God, I feel so sorry for what happened to her, but I just can't find a nicer way to describe her. And then there was this 16-year-old boy named Will, who I always thought to be a creep. It turns out that he was. He became obsessed with Diana, but she wouldn't hear of dating, not him or anyone. She just wanted to be left alone to live in a way that was simple but fulfilling to her. and she had every right to do so. But Will had other plans. It was the last day of summer, and an unexpected heavy rain had made the tourists return earlier to their hotels. Will tricked Diana into entering the fog with him, in the hopes of having her love him forever. He stole her horse, pretended that the horse had ran away, and then offered to enter the fog with her. The rain made it hard to see. The thick droplets in the quasi-darkness turned the path confusing. He offered to hold her hand. The chaos that followed this horrible event was unlike any other. The fog covered part of many private properties, so no one ever thought about gating it, because only the locals could access them without a guide. They ended up isolating it for the next summer, but the damage was done. Diana literally went mad. She would cry, pull her own hair frantically, and tear her own skin apart with her nails nonstop, saying nothing but, "It hurts." I only saw her once in that state, and she looked beyond terrible. The poor girl ended up being sent to an asylum, and no one ever mentioned her again. Even being her cousin, I never knew what happened to Diana after that. It's sad to say it, but the council decided that, considering it had been a single incident that didn't involve outsiders, it was better to hide it from the public for the sake of our economy. We couldn't survive on those crops alone because of the fog, after all, so we'd better make a good use of it. Will, on the other hand, lasted even less than Diana's sanity. He took his own life mere 2 days after his terrible, terrible act. Of course, everyone felt bad for Diana and her parents, but I don't think most people considered how wicked it was. He pretty much assaulted her heart, breaking her mind in the process. I remember being so scared that someone would do something like that to me. But it was a long time ago. For over 20 years, Diana had been nothing but a vague blur in my memory. I left the town, studied, traveled, made friends, and then finally met someone that was special enough to break my years of solitude. I found love later in life than most, and my parents were relieved they lived long enough to see my marriage. The two of them already in wheelchairs, holding hands. "I want to see you grow old together with so much love, just like us," my dad prefaced. As his last wish, I entered the fog with my husband. Hand in hand, we marched into the unknown. The first thing I felt was a splitting headache that pretty much blinded me. Not that I had a lot to see anyway. The cloud was so thick you'd have a hard time cutting it with a normal knife. Then chuckling. The laughter of a baby, multiple babies. Then old people. Laughter old and young and angelic and diabolic. Laughter that made this migraine almost unbearable. "Babe?" I whispered. I was still holding my husband's hand, but it was like holding an inanimate object. There was no warmth, no reaction. Then came a thunder that drummed inside my very soul, giving me tinnitus and nausea. And finally, the excruciating pain in my chest. Instinctively, my free hand reached for my left breast, and in a fraction of a second, it was covered in an impossible amount of blood. I didn't feel lightheaded or like I was about to die, though. I was going to go mad from the incessant laughter before my body collapsed from the blood loss. My husband's hand was still in mine, motionless and rock-like. I squeezed it tighter. Then I felt that I had swallowed the biggest lump one's throat could possibly fit. I choked and coughed, thinking that I'd convulse until it was the end of me. The unliving hand finally went back to normal and squeezed mine back. "Well, that was underwhelming," he laughed, seemingly unaffected, and walked us back. My whole body was exactly like before we entered. No headache, no bleeding, no tinnitus, no nothing. Just this horrible memory. I nodded, trying not to show the horror I was feeling from the fog. Clearly, he hadn't experienced the same. I'm kind of hungry. Do you want to go to Pat's? My husband asked. I actually didn't. I knew Pat's for ages, and I knew they made one of the worst foods in town. It managed to be both bland in taste and oily in texture, and always gave me an awful stomach ache. Yes, I replied in a cheerful tone. I don't know how, but my mouth moved on its own to say that. I was going to suggest another cafe, but my chest started hurting, like a giant fist closed around it. I gasped for air, but my husband didn't seem to notice. I've been keeping it together for a few months, but I'm going crazy from both the physical and the mental pain. My heart hurts like I'm about to die every single time I don't comply with a request from my husband. I even tried to isolate myself from him, but the fact that he didn't want me to resulted in the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life. Most of his wishes were harmless enough, but we have largely different taste. One of the reasons why I fell for him. Now it's torture. So there's always something else that I want to do, and the fog knows it. On the outside, I'll seem to gladly agree, but inside everything hurts. I can't even talk about it. The words will just come out as something else. The only thing that's keeping my sanity from completely disappearing is that he, too, can't deny any of my requests. I've turned it into a ludicrous game where I win if I ask something of him before he asks something of me. I don't know what went wrong. Maybe we aren't compatible enough. Maybe I had doubts about being with him. Or maybe I'm simply hallucinating this whole thing. All I know is that I'm suffering, slowly and to a lesser degree, from the same fate as my cousin. I've been depressed, of course. The more depressed I am, the more my husband wishes to see me well, and the more it hurts. I don't know what else to do. I tried contacting my mother, my neighbors, and even some tourists I've met in the past to ask them about it, but they have no complaints. Nothing's wrong with them. They all say exactly the same, word by word. I feel my mind is taken by a fog of elation and happiness. It's like now I know that my heart truly, literally belongs to my spouse, and I just cannot exist unless I make them feel taken care of and satisfied. Now that I know of the true nature of the fog, these words aren't pretty and romantic at all, but I still wish that somehow they become true to me. Being a mindless body controlled by a mysterious fog to be the perfect wife still sounds better than the alternative. Unless there's no alternative, and just like me, everyone actually knows what's going on, but is unable to speak. Greetings, spoils and ghouls. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. If you have a request or suggestion, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. We hope you enjoyed this video, and remember to stay spooky.